Hey, welcome. Have you ever stopped to think about why a school in Japan is just so different from one in Finland or, say, Brazil or Nigeria? Well, today we're going to dive into the really fascinating world of comparative education to figure out what we can learn by looking at schools all across the globe.
All right, let's just jump right in with the big question that's on everyone's mind. Could we build some kind of perfect school system by just cherry-picking all the best ideas from different countries? I mean, on the surface, it sounds like a brilliant plan, right? But as we're about to find out, it's way, way more complicated than it looks.
So here's our game plan for this explainer. We're going to kick things off by looking at why schools are so different in the first place, then we'll get into what comparative education actually is, trace its history, and explore all the deep factors that shape a school. After that, we'll see how the experts analyze it all, and finally, we'll wrap up with why any of this really matters.
Okay, first things first. It's a simple observation, but a powerful one. Travel literally anywhere in the world, and you'll see that education is definitely not a one-size-fits-all kind of deal. The differences can be absolutely massive, and our first step is to understand why.
And that's where this formal discipline comes in, designed to make sense of all that variation. It's called comparative education. Think of it as the art and science of looking across borders to really understand how and why we teach our kids the way we do.
So what is it exactly? Well, at its heart, comparative education is all about studying one country's school system by using data and insights from another. And the key thing to get here is that this isn't just, casual observation while you're on vacation. No, this is a fully fledged academic field.
And this is super important. The goal isn't just to copy-paste. One of the early pioneers of the field, Marc-Antoine Julien de Paris, hit the nail on the head. He said the point is to perfect your own system, using changes that actually fit your local situation. It's all about intelligent adaptation, not just blind imitation. That's the whole game. A researcher named Harold Noah actually broke this down into 4 main goals. First off, you simply describe what's going on out there. Second, you use that knowledge to help develop and improve schools. Third, and this one is huge, you highlight that deep, deep connection between education and the society it exists in. And finally, the hope is to find some bigger truths about education that hold up across different cultures.
Now, this field didn't just pop up overnight, fully formed. It actually has a pretty cool evolution. It started out as something more like a collection of stories from travelers and slowly grew into the rigorous science it is today. Let's take a look at how that happened.
So, way back in the early 1800s, it really was just travelers' tales. Guys like Horace Mann would visit Europe, take a bunch of notes, and then go home and say, hey, we should borrow this. But then, around 1900, Sir Michael Sadler asked a game-changing question. He basically said, wait a minute, how much can we really learn when you factor in the local culture? And that shifted everything. From there, scholars started digging into the root causes of problems, which eventually led us to the scientific field we know today.
You can really see this journey in 3 big stages. First was the descriptive phase. It was all about see a cool thing, borrow a cool thing. Then people got a little smarter, and we entered the predictive phase. Scholars started asking, okay, but will this cool thing actually work back home? And that brings us to today, the scientific phase, where any idea has to go through rigorous, objective analysis before anyone even thinks about adapting it. And this brings us to what is maybe the most important idea in this whole explainer. You can't just copy an education system, because every single one is woven from this incredibly complex and unique fabric of social, cultural, and historical factors. It's not a machine with interchangeable parts. It's a living, breathing part of a society. Okay, let's start with the societal and cultural stuff. I mean, just think about language. In a place like Nigeria, teaching kids in their local language first can make a massive difference. Religion? It can shape the entire curriculum. History is a huge one. The legacy of colonialism, for instance, still echoes in the education systems of many African nations. And get this, even geography and climate matter. They can decide the school's schedule to work around farming seasons or avoid bad weather. And then, of course, there are the big two: politics and money. A country's political ideology directly molds its schools. In socialist Tanzania, for example, the goal was education for self-reliance, which meant focusing on practical skills like farming. Political instability can create chaos, with education policy flipping every time a new government takes over. And economics? Well, that's a no-brainer, right? A country's wealth determines just about everything, from how much teachers get paid to whether a school even has a roof. Okay, so things are clearly complicated. We get it. The question is, how do the experts actually, do this? How do they cut through all that noise to compare school systems in a way that's actually meaningful and scientific? Well, it turns out they have a toolkit for that.
One of the classic toolkits comes from a scholar named George Baraday. He laid out this really clear 4-step process. First up is description. You just gather the raw facts. What's being taught? How is it being taught? Then comes interpretation, where you bring in other fields like sociology to understand the why behind those facts. Next is juxtaposition, which is a fancy way of saying you put the info from different countries side by side to see what lines up. And finally, you get to comparison, where you bring it all together to test an idea and figure out what it all means.
Then you've got Brian Holmes, who came at it from a totally different direction with what's called the problem approach. See, instead of starting with data, he starts with a problem. First, you define exactly what problem you're trying to solve. Then you brainstorm some possible policy solutions. But, and this is the critical part, before you do anything, you analyze the context of the place you're in. The whole point is to predict the consequences of your policy before you roll it out and potentially mess things up.
So to put it really simply, here's the difference. Baraday starts with data to understand what is. He's looking for lessons hidden in the cultural context. Holmes starts with a problem to predict what if. He's trying to build a tool that helps policymakers make better decisions. One is about understanding, the other is about predicting. And you know what? You really need both.
All right, I know this can all feel a bit theoretical, a little academic, but trust me, this stuff has huge real-world consequences. So let's bring it all home and talk about why this actually matters for the school right down the street from you. So what's the big payoff? Well, first, it leads to informed borrowing. We learn to adapt smart ideas instead of just copying them and watching them fail, which saves time and money. It also helps us plan everything from curricula to teaching styles based on actual research. Plus, it gives us benchmarks from other countries to help us evaluate how our own schools are doing. And maybe the best part? It just sparks new, innovative ideas for solving those stubborn problems that never seem to go away. And that leaves me with one final thought I want you to take with you. Now that you've got this framework, now that you know you have to think about culture and politics and all of it, what's one idea you've heard about from another country's education system that, if it was adapted carefully, could genuinely make a school in your community better? Seriously, think about it. It's a powerful question, and just starting to answer it, well, that's how real change begins. Thanks for joining me.